House and Senate leaders reaching a debt deal, or so we think, to avoid a default, but the downgrade threat still looms in the background. Joining us now, Republican Congressman David Schweikert of Arizona and Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. Both serve on the House Financial Services Committee. And I'll start with you since you're in studio with me. You going to vote for this?
Well, you know, won't know that for a couple of hours, right? None of us.
Haven't
except
decided.
Hey, we haven't seen the deal, right? I mean, I think other than probably 10 of the leadership members, none of us have actually seen what's in it. We've seen the headlines, but you know,
So what happened last night? Nobody calls you. Nobody says, "Here's a draft of what we're doing," and are you on board?
You know, we got you guys were making reference earlier to the 3-page TARP presentation. That's what we've got, but the devil's in the details.
Do you actually have 3 pages?
We've got the headlines. But
okay, so let's do it this way. What would prevent you from voting
no?
for it?
Yeah, what would cause you to vote no?
Well, you know, one of the key issues that we haven't talked a lot about is how much of the cuts happen when, right? There's not a lot of arguments that cuts need to happen. We all acknowledge that, right? But what if
there's other people around this table who would disagree, but continue on.
All right.
That cuts need to happen? Who would disagree with that?
He just said there's not a lot of...
oh, right. And you said people around this table would disagree that cuts need to happen.
Oh, no, he just said...
Not this table.
I thought he said that cuts didn't need to happen.
No, it did.
No, cuts need to happen.
The question is when. You know, what would be the magnitude of cuts that would turn this hesitant recovery into another recession, right? Nobody wants to go there. So that's a big question on my mind. How fast do these things? We know the magnitude over 10 years, but how do they get distributed over those 10 years?
It's supposed to be back-end loaded.
Hey, David, are you voting for this thing?
You know, Jim and I actually have the same problem. You know, we're trying to read through it line by line. I think it sits about 70 pages. And if you've actually read legislation, the devil really is in the details. You got to go through it very carefully because in some ways my concern is the same. But what are the cuts in the first couple years? I obviously want more in the earlier years, substantially because putting caps on a future Congress, it means very, very little. You get what you get for this Congress.
Let's just talk about that. We have a deadline here. Are either of you seriously thinking about saying no? Would you say no at this point?
I would tell you, I would be a lean no until I find that the
so you're leaning no before we
really does accomplish what we're after.
Jim?
Look, we're elected not to rubber stamp decisions made by our leadership. We are elected to understand the facts and to make a judgment. And that's, I think, what both of us are going to do.
What do you think the implications are if you do say no today?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question, right? I mean, this is at the end of the day, the hammer that the leadership has to hold over members on both sides of the aisle, right? Don't do this, and we're in a world of economic catastrophe, and that's a pretty powerful hammer.
Was there any other way?
Of course there was another way.
No, it appears not. It appears like you couldn't get to a compromise without a gun to your head.
And we're still hearing the same things from, this is a microcosm from both of you guys. We're hearing the same
And we're hearing it on Monday morning after there's supposed to be a deal.
You want the cuts to be further out and not come. He wants them near in and more. You want less cuts further out. He wants more further in.
This is the most depressing thing I've heard all morning. But I thought there was a deal, then we get both of these guys on. It sounds like there's no deal.
You know, ever since the deal was announced, I've been thinking to myself and watching the futures and watching the markets, this is not a done deal. Look, I've only been there 3 years, so I'm hardly the political pundit, but I will tell you that what you saw last week when the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, could not get a deal done until at the last minute he decided to put the balanced budget agreement on. Look, he doesn't know within his own caucus,
right.
and I will tell you that our caucus is equally uncertain.
Has Boehner talked to you, David?
No, and we will be having our sit-downs earlier this morning, and we'll start to actually walk through some of the mechanics, but also some of the perceptions of where we are as a group. Look, there's actually an upside for the silliness we've gone through the last 3 weeks, and that is, I believe the American people are starting to understand the scale of our debt problem. Yeah, we've had this dance over here where it's raising our borrowing capacity, but the reality, we're going to be fighting through this monstrous debt problem and our demographic problem for at least another decade.
Jim, some of the comments this morning is that this is a big victory for the Tea Party. They moved the debate strongly to the right on this issue, and they walk away victors here. What's your impression of that?
Well, I'll say 2 things about that. One, since time immemorial, games of chicken have been won by that individual who is most apparently crazy, and there's no doubt that that is what played out in the last week or so. And look,
that's just wrong.
And that's a fact. Number 2, here's what's not in this discussion right now. A lot of the Democrats are saying, the president said, we need a balanced deal, right? What people are forgetting in this whole discussion is that 18 months from now, the Bush tax cuts 01 and 03 expire, and the president has promised to veto expiration, for certainly for the high end, that is one heck of a negotiating tool.
Congressman Schweikert, do you agree with that? I mean, this idea that the Tea Party has come, well, first of all, that they played a much harder game of chicken, or a much crazier game of chicken, and that ultimately this is a victory for the Tea Party here.
No, I actually don't, because if you think through what's gone on the last couple of weeks, the House Republicans, in 2 occasions now, produced legislation, were able to pass it, where the Senate couldn't seem to put something on paper and actually send it our direction. So in some ways, it sort of matters where you're standing, what you're watching.
Congressman Schweikert, do you believe that this deal allows for increased taxes or not?
Oh, that's my great fear, and that's what we're trying to understand is with the commission, where we're sitting a year and a half from now, does it basically set up, almost as Jim was talking about, this problem where you start to hit a cascade of new taxes.
And we don't know the answer, but we will find out.
No,
I need to leave it there. I apologize, but thank you both for coming on this morning.